How's everybody doing today? How's everybody doing? This is Stephen Hanks. I'm right here in Hampton, Virginia, Fort Monroe, and here right at the spot that I am standing is where the first Africans were unloaded and made their first arrival in North America, in the colony of Virginia in August of 1619. So this is where it happened, right here. This is where it happened. It's a long story. It's very complicated. There's a lot of history involved. And there's a lot of descendants still living today. But this is where it unfolded, right here in the latter part of August 1619. There was a Portuguese ship leaving Angola in August of that year. It was the São Batista. It was loaded with Africans that had been captured in the Portuguese-Angolan wars. And that ship was headed to the Caribbean, heading actually to Veracruz, New Spain, which today we call Mexico. On the way, the ship was attacked by two pirate ships, the White Lion and the Treasurer. Here's a view of the harbor here. And here we can see the James River all the way across. So that ship, the Batista, fully loaded with kidnapped human beings, Africans from the Kingdom of Congo and the Kingdom of Ndongo, Babundu and Kimbundu speaking people, were loaded on the ship Batista and headed to Mexico, or Veracruz, New Spain. On the way there, in the latter part of August, it was attacked by two pirate ships, the White Lion and the Treasurer, two English pirate ships. And they each took off of the Batista about 50 or so of those kidnapped Africans. White Lion took about 20 and odd, and Treasurer took about the same amount, 25 to 29, give or take. And they headed down toward the colony of Virginia to see what they could do with them. Now, at this time in history, the Kingdom of Great Britain was not involved in the slave trade. There was no such thing as slavery in Britain at this time. So these English pirates, they probably didn't even know what they really had. The Atlantic slave trade was going on live as well. The Portuguese had a monopoly on it. The Portuguese wars with Angola and with Congo had gone on for several years, and they were heavily involved in the slave trade, bringing Africans into the Caribbean, Barbados, Brazil, Bahamas, Haiti, and working the sugar cane fields. And so, but England was not involved. And so these pirates really didn't know what they had. So they came down to the colony of Virginia. And here is the Fort Monroe right up here. And so they came and they brought those Africans in. And you all remember the story of Pocahontas. They made a movie about it a couple of years ago. And you remember she was the Indian princess, and she married an Englishman named John Wolfe. Well, she later died, and John Wolfe was a widower. He was present on that particular day in August 1619, and he wrote in his journal that he saw a ship coming, the White Lion, come into the harbor here, and they unloaded 20 and odd Negroes and exchanged them for food. And so that's how the story got started. About 3 or 4 days later, the ship Treasurer came with its kidnapped cargo and did likewise. Came to the colony, Virginia, unloaded them, and then took the rest of them. And the last, they were headed to Bermuda to try to sell the rest of their kidnapped cargo. So there was probably maybe 50 or so of these Angolan Africans who arrived here in the colony of Virginia for the first time. They did not come as slaves. They came as kidnapped human beings. And slavery was not active in the colony of Virginia at this time in 1619. There was no such thing as slavery. There was indentured servitude. And indentured servants were being brought from Britain. They had a contract, and they would work maybe 5 to 10 years. After that, they would be given their freedom. But of course, the Africans, these kidnapped Africans from Congo and Ndongo, who were put into the Portuguese slave pens at Luanda, Angola, they didn't have such a written contract. So when they came here, who knows how long they served. They may have served 10 years, or according to the custom at the time, they might have served 21 years. But give or take, they were not as slaves, they were indentured servants. And so, if I can get this to cooperate here. They came here as indentured servants. They served their time, and after that, they were free. They were free people, men and women and children. They were free once they served their time. Many of them went on to become landholders, freeholders as they called them. They owned land. Many of them went on to marry, have children. They married English women as well as African women. Although there was not as many African women at first as there were English women. So, but they married, and they were free. And it was not due to the color of their skin that was the law of the land or the caste of society. It was the class in society. If you were a planter, if you were a gentleman, you were at the top of the social ladder, followed by the planters, then the yeomen, followed by the indentured servant was the last on the social totem pole. And so these Africans fell into that category. But like I said, once they served their time, they were free, and they were able to go on and live their lives in peace. Many of them, like I said, owned land, bought land. Many of them even purchased indentured servants themselves. These Africans actually purchased indentured servants themselves. And they went on to live prosperous lives. But then, starting in 1639, all the way until about 1705, there was a turn for the worse for this free African community that existed in colonial Virginia. Because starting in 1639 up until 1705, there was a series of laws that were passed by the House of Burgesses, a series of statutes that heavily restricted, not immediately, but over time, restricted the Africans' freedom. So by beginning in 1639 and just less than 100 years, by 1705, chattel slavery was in full force. By 1705, chattel slavery was the law of the land in Virginia and in Great Britain and in the rest of the colonies, Massachusetts and so forth, New York. So that's the history. The slave laws began after these Africans arrived in Virginia. and they were not slaves when they first came. They had freedom. They formed a community. They had skills. They became a part of the community. But the people that were in government apparently had other reasons involved, because within less than 100 years, that free African American community was dismantled.